Alright guys, hope you're all doing well, hope you're all keeping safe. It's finally Friday. I'm very much looking forward to some family time this evening. Hope you guys are going to have a good one as well. Phase 3 of the PTS is currently underway and Title Update 10 is getting closer. One of the biggest changes with TU10 was the weapon buffs to almost every weapon in the game, aside from a couple of nerfs to weapons like the M1A or the MK17 rifle. So today I wanted to go over what the best weapons are for burst and sustained DPS plus the damage per magazine when TU10 drops. If you enjoyed this one, drop a like down below, subscribe for Division content, and let's begin. So guys, full disclosure before we start, all of this data has come from a Weapon Spreadsheet uploaded to the Reddit forum by user AA_Brian. So all props to them for all of this information. A couple of things before we start as well. This video will contain the DPS values. It doesn't take into account stability or accuracy on weapons, of course, and presumes you hit every bullet. The values do not take into account any mods to your weapons, the static mod values for exotics, talents on exotics, or anything else like that. This is simply the base damage, the magazine size, the RPM, the time to empty magazine, and the reload speed, given the burst, sustain, and total damage of magazine per weapons. So please bear that in mind as we go through this, and I will of course talk about that sort of stuff as we go through this anyway. An example would be the Chameleon, which has a higher sustained DPS than, say, the AKM, but much less optimal range at only 15 meters. The AKM is 31 meters. So with that said, let's begin. Alright, so let's start with the assault rifles. And I won't go over every single one. I'm just going to go over the main ones here, guys. I will choose the kind of the highest burst DPS, sustained DPS, and total damage of magazine. Now, the best burst DPS assault rifle, and this is something I hinted at in recent videos, is actually coming out as the Bighorn exotic. Now, before I show you the results, guys, I've seen reports that the Bighorn is still not very good at all. So please bear that in mind. So the Bighorn has a 30 mag, an RPM of 800, time to empty of 2.25 seconds, reload speed of 2.1 seconds, with a base damage of 51,231, which is an 11.2% increase in base damage from TU9.1 values. The burst damage here is 683,079. The closest weapon to this is actually the FAMAS at 662k. Of course, depending on what talents you put on the FAMAS, it's likely going to outperform the Bighorn anyway. The Bighorn, as I said, like before, this relies on you hitting every single bullet. The lowest here was actually the MK16 with a burst DPS of 572,000, so it's about 20% less powerful than the Bighorn when it comes to burst DPS based on the values here. Looking at sustained DPS, and it's quite a different picture. The Eagle Bearer is actually top here. Mag size of 60, RPM of 750, time to empty of 4.8 seconds, reload speed of 2.5 seconds, and a base damage of 51,692, which is a 7.8% base damage increase over TU 9.1. The Eagle Bearer has a sustained DPS of 424,868, with its closest rival having only 353,000, and that's from the Bighorn, which is about a 20% difference in sustained DPS. The biggest difference here, though, is actually total damage per magazine, with the Eagle Bearer racking in a massive 3.1 million damage, and the next closest being the Chameleon with a measly 2 million, which is a huge 55% difference. There's no doubt that the Eagle Bearer is still going to be very, very strong with Title Update 10, albeit somewhat neutered because of all the weapon talents that could make up the difference on other weapons. Let's move on to LMGs. So to start off with, let's go over the burst DPS, and it appears that the L86 is the highest by a tiny amount. The L86 has a mag size of 30, RPM of 610, time to empty of 2.95 seconds, reload speed of 3 seconds, and a base damage of 59,679, which is an 8.5% buff over the TU 9.1 values. The burst DPS stands at 606,740, with the RPK following closely behind on 601k, and the MG5 in third place at 595k. The bottom of the pile is actually for burst DPS is the Pestilence, which is kind of no surprise really, as any low rate of fire weapon will likely outperforming the sustained portion of DPS, not the burst. The burst amount was 430k, but don't forget the talents on the Pestilence, guys, which are still very strong. It will still be one of the best LMGs to use. Let's move on to the sustained DPS. No surprise with this one, to be honest, because you never have to reload, and it's the Bullet King. A mag of 100, an RPM of 850, time to empty of 7 seconds, no reload required, and a base damage of 37,662, which is a 2.6% buff over TU 9.1. The burst DPS, or sustained DPS, for the Bullet King came out at 532,984, with a second place going to the Stoner LAMG, coming in at 378k, followed by the M60 at 356k. The Bullet King has more than a 40% sustained DPS over its closest rival, which is pretty incredible, and again, not surprising when you don't have to reload. Let's move on to the rifles, because I know you're a lot thirsty for those M1A numbers. So, starting with the Burst DPS again, and we have the M1A CQB rifle, which is the high rate of fire variant of the M1A. Mag size of 10, RPM of 320, time to empty of 1.875 seconds, reload speed of 3 seconds, and a base damage of 156,127, which is a 10.7% buff compared to TU 9.1 values. The burst DPS on this comes out at an impressive 832,677, followed by the UMP45, the ACR, the lightweight M4, and then the classic M1A, which comes in at 616k, which is a huge 35% difference. But let's not forget, though, how much easier it is to use the classic M1A compared to the high rate of fire rifles, which should have good burst DPS. Plus, you can one-shot enemies with the classic M1A, which won't happen with the high rate of fire rifles, and that's also a huge advantage. The M1A is still going to be one of the best rifles, if not the best rifle, when TU10 drops. Moving on to the sustained DPS, and the classic M1A is nowhere near the top here. Coming out on top is actually the ACR. Mag of 30, RPM of 420, time to empty of 4.28 seconds, reload speed of 2.3 seconds, and a base damage of 92,627, which is a 3.7% buff compared to what you would get in the TU9. This actually comes out at 421,945 sustain DPS. This is followed closely by the lightweight M4 at 421k. The highest total damage of magazine actually goes to the new Ravenous exotic, coming in at 3.6 million, with the UIC 15 coming in second place at 3.1 million. Like I said before, the slow rate of fire rifles are still going to be very strong. But with them, they're getting a TU nerf. They're getting a nerf with TU10, and so the fast rate of fire rifles getting a significant buff. It may now be much more viable to use something like the lightweight M4 or the ACR. They may even be meta, dare I say it, for TU10. It might happen. Next up, and let's look at SMGs, because they've had a huge buff across the board with TU10, and I'm actually really looking forward to using them very soon. Let's start with the burst DPS. On top is the Vector SBR 9mm. Magazine of 19, RPM of 1200, time to empty is 0.95 seconds or 950 milliseconds, reload speed of 1.9 seconds, and a base damage of 42,318, which is a 5.9% buff from TU 9.1 values. This is a burst DPS of 848,353,000, with the other Vector variants coming second with a burst DPS of 808,000. Next we have the MPX, followed by the MP7. The MPX just received a nerf with phase 3 of the PTS, so I suspect this is actually going to fall down the list. So you're looking at the Vector SBR 9mm, probably followed by the MP7. No surprise with this one, to be honest. Sustained DPS, well, there it gets a little bit interesting. Top of the pile, but certainly not the best SMG. Coming with TU10 is actually the Tommy gun. Magazine of 50, RPM of 800, time to empty of 3.75 seconds, and a reload speed of 2.3 seconds. A base damage of 55,464, which is a huge 38.8% damage buff compared to TU 9.1. This comes in at 458,384 sustain DPS, followed by the enhanced PP19 and then the P90. Let's not forget the Tommy gun has less mod slots, so if you want sustain DPS from an SMG, you probably go with something like the PP19 or you probably go for the P90 actually. When it comes to total damage of magazine, the spreadsheet has the Slayer named Thompson, but we all know that's awful. Top of the list then goes to the PP19 with a value of 3.1 million, followed by the Tommy gun, and then the Chatterbox, which came in at 2.5 million. I actually think the Chatterbox might be one of the best SMGs coming with TU10. Let's move on to the MMRs. First and top of the list is the Nemesis. Magazine size of 5, RPM of 50, time to empty of 3.3 seconds, reload speed of 3.2, and a base damage of 940. which is an 11.1% base damage buff. 940,146, that is. The Burst DPS came in at 783,455, followed by the SVD variant at 692k, and then the G28. Without a doubt, the Nemesis is going to be the best MMR for outright damage, but it does take the exotic weapon slot, so you're not going to be able to use any other exotic weapon, plus your shot needs to be charged up, so it's very unforgiving if you miss as well. With that said, the SVD has incredibly awful accuracy and stability, and the same could be said for the G28, although you could probably pair it with some weapon handling and maybe alleviate that a little bit. The Nemesis actually came in at the highest for sustained DPS as well as total damage of magazine as well. I think the Nemesis is going to be top of the bar when it comes to MMRs, but if you're not wanting to use that, then I'd probably use any other kind of slow rate of fire sniper, essentially, or marksman rifle if you want to call it that. Something like the Model 700 or something like that, for example. So now finally, I just wanted to look at all the weapons for burst DPS, sustain and total damage of magazine. Of course, when it comes to burst damage, the top of the pile are always going to be shotguns. The Tsunami SASG-12 comes in at top with a burst DPS of just over 1 million, 1,094,873 to be exact, followed by the custom M870 at 869k, so there's actually quite a big difference here. Let's be honest though, if you're going for a burst weapon, unless you're playing PvP, you're unlikely to use a shotgun, unless it's a secondary weapon. So what weapon would be next? Well, it appears the Vector SBR 9mm actually, with the 846k burst DPS, will be there, followed by the M1A CQB and other high rate of fire rifles. Now that doesn't mean the Vector is going to be the best SMG at all, but it does mean that if you want to do some serious burst damage, the Vector is topping the list outside of shotguns. What about sustained DPS? Again, aside from shotguns, it's actually the Bullet King. The ACS-12 actually tops the list with a sustained DPS of 537k, but for the same reasons I explained before, you're probably going to want to go for the Bullet King when it comes to sustain DPS. The total damage for magazine award actually goes to the Stoner LAMG based on these values. Like I said at the start, guys, this spreadsheet by no means, confirms what will be the best weapon in the game, because there are plenty of factors which make a substantial difference. The biggest one being how consistent you are at making shots and other things. With the M1A, for example, the amount of times you can one or two shot enemies is actually really important to keeping yourself alive. Whereas with fast rate of fire rifles, it's going to take a lot more shots, meaning NPCs have a much longer time to react. Plus, with more shots means more opportunities to miss as well. I think the Nemesis will quite clearly still be the best MMR in the game with TU10. With a buff of over 11%, it's probably going to be your go-to. With that said, you won't be able to use another exotic, and you have to make your shots. If you can't, the SOCOM MK20 comes in second, but if you want a slow firing MMR, then it appears the Model 700 is your best bet, I believe. What I hope is that all the weapons are a lot closer in power compared to the live game, and I think they're going to be. I'm looking forward to using the Chameleon more, although disappointed with the change made for Phase 3 of the PTS. And, just to use something different to the M1A and the Eagle Bear, which is what I've been using now for a considerable amount of time. I'm specifically looking forward to using SMGs more with TU10. But that's it for today's video, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you all have a fantastic weekend. We will have State of the Game next week. We're going to get some more Phase 3 stuff coming next week for the PTS. So I will obviously keep a lookout on the forums to see what's going on with Phase 3 and get some feedback out to you guys, so you guys know exactly what is going on and what to expect with TU10. But with that said, I'll see you all in the next video. Epic out.